Bank 101. If you get this formula, you get banking.
Okay. Nice.
Okay. The formula is return on equity equals return on assets times leverage. So what does a bank do? It basically sells you access to its balance sheet for a price, which is generally a loan. So let's take an extreme example. Let's say a bank has $100 billion in assets. Most of it are loans.
Yeah.
And it has only $1 billion in equity. So it's levered 100 to 1. For bank analysts, the real determination of how profitable you are is the return on assets, because that's all the money you're lending out. The leverage is just math, how much equity you have to have against those assets. So the first question you ask is, what's the return on assets of a bank? So Citigroup, which has underperformed for years, has a return on assets of less than 1%. JP Morgan, which is a great bank, has a return on assets of something like 1.5% of assets. If you're levered 100 to 1, let's keep it very simple. Let's say your return on assets is 1%, which would be okay today, but not great.
Okay. Lower end.
Your return on equity is 100%. Return on equity equals return on assets times leverage. So the first lesson here is that banks have a built-in incentive to ever increase their leverage because the CEO is basically compensated on return on equity.
Right.
So the less equity you have and the more leverage you have, the higher your return on equity. So here's the crisis in a nutshell. So if you're levered 100 to 1, now none of these banks are levered 100 to 1, but they were levered 40 to 1. Let's keep it 100 to 1. The two big differences in terms of banks' business model is that the model only works with leverage, and the cost of goods sold, which is losses, is unknown at point of sale. Meaning when you make a whole bunch of loans to people, you're just guessing what the losses are going to be.
Pay back. Yeah.
We only know one thing. You're going to be wrong. The only question is in which direction.
Sure.
So if you have a bank that's 100 times levered and has a 1% ROA, its return on equity is 100%. But suppose you made a whole bunch of subprime loans. And now instead of a 1% return on assets, you have a negative 1% return on assets. Now your return on equity is negative 100%, meaning you just wiped out your equity. So the lesson is if you're really, 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 really levered, it doesn't take that much losses to blow you up.
Wipe it all out.
Mm-hmm. But if you're levered 10, 15 to 1, it takes a lot more losses. That's the lesson.
You can stomach more non-performing loans.
Of course, because you have more equity.
That makes sense.
And how was that enforced? So you list that as like a major change of how banks are, let's say, less prone to these crashes that
it was enforced through the annual stress test.
Okay.
That's a long, complicated story.
Sure, yeah.
But the gist of it basically was that over a couple of years, he basically crammed their leverage down.
Gotcha.
Basically, what the stress test does is it's like an exam. And it says, here's an economic scenario. Your capital is here. In this scenario, you're going to lose some capital. You're going to go to here. You have to be above a certain level under this stress scenario. Mm-hmm. So therefore, you have to have more equity than you originally thought you needed. And he forced all the banks to delever.
And this is something that's still happening to this day?
It's still happening to this day, but now because the leverage went down so much, they're allowing the leverage to tick up a little bit.
Okay.
But not much. A little bit.
Are there any significant changes besides that position coming into place and that type of like check or enforcement? Or is that the main thing that you consider?
The annual stress test, as people like to say, is like the binding constraint on banks. That's it.
Because no matter what you do, you have to be able to get through that
You
test
have to
year.
pass that test every year.
Yeah.
It's not optional.
Yeah, but didn't like Silicon Valley Bank
want to bring up a sore topic.
I mean, there's banks that pass that test and then turns out they weren't. Okay.
In the regulator's defense, and believe me, these people are not in the Hall of Fame. Silicon Valley, in terms of its size, was below a certain threshold.
I see. So they weren't.
And so some of the tougher tests that applied to Citibank and Bank of America did not apply. So for example,
I see.
The big banks have major, not just capital requirements, they also have major liquidity requirements, meaning you have to have a certain enormous amount of money, basically in short-term treasuries. So those rules didn't apply to Silicon Valley. It's not like the bigger banks were such geniuses. Bank of America made a very bad bet too, but they couldn't make as big a bet as Silicon Valley because they had to have much more short-term liquidity.
Right. They had rules that were more, okay. That makes total sense.
I felt like in, not just in the movie, but also in the follow-up explanations that I've seen from yourself, there's sort of a timeline to your realization of how consequential what you were discovering was going to be. And I was wondering at what At what stage did you realize that this was going to have far-reaching consequences beyond just the U.S. housing market? Like, oh, this is going to be something that collapses the economy of Iceland, or collapses the economy of Greece. Like
Right.
it had far. I think a lot of the movie spends time talking about the U.S. housing market is going to crash, but not that the global financial system is going to collapse.
So there's 07 and there's 08. So the subprime story is really an 07 story. I mean, we sort of knew, but we kept finding things that we didn't even know existed. Like, I remember I got a call from a hedge fund guy that I was friendly with. And he says to me, you know what a SIV is? So a SIV is a special investment vehicle. It turned out that was like a big deal. And I said, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. And it turned out that these were these vehicles where banks would put all this crap into, and it would be technically off balance sheet. What we realized was that if their stuff ever went bad, they couldn't allow the investors to eat the loss. So the banks would take it back on balance sheets. That's how, when I said Citigroup was levered 33-1, but in actuality it was levered 40-1.
Right,
that's because all this other crap was out there. So it took a while to really figure. I mean, it had so many tentacles. We were discovering new ones all the time.
So you're kind of realizing that this can have much farther reaching consequences than you initially, because you keep finding.
So I knew the system was basically at risk by the end of 07. The intellectual mistake that I made in 08, if you ask any of my partners, they'd say the same thing. The mistake that we made as a group was we walked into 08 thinking, this is really bad. It just is really, I mean, it's frightening. I can't sleep at night. Surely the government must know what we know, because it's just so bad.
It's so obvious.
It's just so bad. And we didn't understand until it was too late. It was like till the fall that they didn't know. They really didn't know.
They were that behind.
There was this wonderful moment in 08 where I never forget this. Bernanke, and this is like in the late spring where I started to realize like we are fucked, which is Bernanke made a speech. And then shortly after, Secretary of the Treasury Paulson made a speech. They both said the same thing.
Yeah.
I remember sitting in the office, comes across the tape. They both said the same line. The subprime crisis is contained.
Yeah.
And I remember turning to Danny Moses and I said, it's contained, all right. It's contained the planet Earth.
That's like,
and that's when I knew, like I was thinking, you must really not understand what's going on, because you wouldn't say that if you really understood.
it's like the Bush mission accomplished speech in 2003. He's like, guys, we did it. It's over.
So, okay, but when you're listening to Powell now, you don't have